My name is Bill Ayers. I'm a professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago. I have 3 grown kids, and I live on the South Side in Hyde Park. During the 1960s, I was a member and then a leader of Students for a Democratic Society, the main student organization opposing the war in Vietnam. I then became one of the founding members of the Weatherman faction of SDS, which became the illegal Weather Underground.
In the 1970s, the Weather Underground took credit for 24 bombings of public buildings across the United States. They also released a lot of revolutionary communiques explaining why they were doing this.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the show that questions everything
except your intelligence.
I'm Ken Taylor.
And I'm John Perry.
Bill Ayers and the Weather Underground. I haven't thought about that for a while. What's the point of that?
Well, our topic this week is terrorism. This is a topic that I think is going to test one of our philosophical skills.
Which skill would that be, John?
Being dispassionate, analytical, and objective.
I could do that.
Even discussing something like 9/11.
Oh, no, that's a different matter. I mean, you got to get emotional about that. I mean, and why shouldn't you? There really isn't any philosophical controversy about that. I mean, the terrorists were bad guys. They deserve to be hunted down and killed and brought to justice. Maybe there's a debate about the means, but what's the philosophical question?
The philosophical question is, what do we add to this description as people who've hurt us and are our enemies by calling them terrorists? What's the content of that?
Well, that's easy. Terrorists intentionally kill innocent civilians. They kill ordinary people going about their everyday business. They're cold-blooded murderers. They kill children, janitors, cab drivers. That makes them not just ordinary enemies, but really bad enemies. They're kind of mass murderer enemies.
Well, in modern warfare, everybody kills innocents. We killed innocents in Afghanistan. Not all of our bombs hit military targets. We certainly killed innocents in Vietnam and Cambodia.
But we didn't set out to kill innocents. We tried to prevent it. We tried hard to prevent it. At least that's what the military planners say. And if they do kill innocents, they call it collateral damage.
Okay, Ken, so you're actually doing some philosophy about our topic.
Oh, yeah.
You're saying that being a terrorist, as opposed to just accidentally killing someone, is a matter of intention, a matter of your plan. Are you sure you're right about that? Are you sure that planning to kill civilians would always be such a bad thing?
Well,
what if you were really, really convinced that by terrorizing some civilians you could save thousands of lives or end a really unjust war?
That's the Bill Ayers point, I guess. I mean, you could get yourself into the frame of mind where you thought terrorism was the right thing to do for some greater cause.
So let's hear some more from Bill Ayers.
Before 1968, everything we undertook with a song and with a sense of joy and love and possibility. And after 1969, it seemed that every time we opened our mouths to sing, we could only scream. As the movement grew, the aspirations also grew, and so it wasn't just a matter of ending this one war. It was ending the conditions that created war, and it wasn't just ending the conditions that created war. It was getting rid of the people who lead us down that path to war and domination and imperialism and empire and all that. The war and everything that supported the war was infused with violence, was dripping from head to foot with blood. And what we tried to do was to bring that violence to the surface so that everybody could see it and sign on or sign off. And I must say that in our despair, some people actually did flirt with the idea of matching official terrorism with a terrorism of our own. And the explosion at the townhouse in New York City in 1970 that killed Diana Oughton and Terry Robbins and Ted Gold, that was an expression of we're going to match official terrorism with a responsive terrorism. And that ended in disaster.
In 1970, 3 members of the Weather Underground died when a bomb they were building in a Greenwich Village townhouse exploded.
Ayers' girlfriend, Diana Oughton, was among them.
The fact that we used violence and employed violence in our tactics is one of the very disturbing aspects of our story, but we did. You know, I'm not sure that the sense that we had was that violence would work. I think the sense we had was that a deeply violent government, a deeply violent society will not be persuaded by logic. And we made a hard distinction between what you might call terrorism and what you might call political violence. Terrorism is what we were opposing. That is, the war in Vietnam was an act of official terror. It was an act of killing innocents for some larger purpose, trying to drive people against an idea or a government by threatening them, intimidating them, terrifying them. And we saw ourselves as rising up in opposition to that terror.
Okay, Ken, are your thought processes rolling?
Yeah, I'm getting into it. I'm trying to be dispassionate, John. And I noticed something. Did you notice what Ayers called what the government did? He called that terrorism. And he called what his side did political violence. That shows something about the word terrorism. It has lots of emotive meaning, as philosophers like to call it.
Just remind me what emotive meaning is.
That's when I use a word and I express my emotions in the use of that word, and I try to elicit from you, my listener or hearer, the same emotions. You know, take calling somebody an African American or Caucasian or Hispanic. Those are emotionally neutral terms. And contrast that with emotionally loaded ethnic slurs, which I won't repeat here.
All right, I get the idea. Ethnic slurs, though, now they're bad because their emotive meaning really is kind of irrational.
We see, it seems inappropriate somehow.
But like if you call a mass murder a villain or disgusting, I mean that's emotional, but it's appropriate. So which is terrorism?
Well, that sounds like the kind of thing we should ask our guest, John.
Okay, Ken, we're starting with two guests. Abe Sofair is senior fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institute.
That conservative think tank?
That's its reputation. He's also a professor of law. His specialty is international law, and he's been involved in lots of dicey negotiations in the Middle East.
And our second guest is Nadim Hussain, an assistant professor of philosophy at Stanford. John and my young colleague. He's a specialist in ethics. He works a lot on Nietzsche, but he's also thought a lot about terrorism, and his thoughts about terrorism are shaped in part by his experiences growing up in Pakistan, Libya, and lastly, the United States.
Gentlemen, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Ken, let's start with Abe Sofair. Abe, as an expert on international law, do you have any particular definition for terrorism?
I think that the word terrorism is very complicated. I've always opposed any effort to define it in the law. There are efforts that have been made in certain statutes where it's defined essentially as the use of force against nationals of a given country, non-combatants, in order to compel the government of that country to change its policy on one thing or another. That's not a bad definition, but I would have preferred just to stick with what I am comfortable with, and that is the treaties and statutes that make criminal those kinds of conduct that we associate with terrorism.
Let me ask you a question before I turn to Nadim Hussain. Or maybe I'll ask this question to Nadim. The cynic in me responds to you by saying, well, that's very nice. That's all. There are these agreements among sovereign states about what they will count as terrorism. But, I mean, if I'm a terrorist, I'm typically a non-state actor, and I have goals that I don't care what the states think. So, Nadim, why should I care if I'm a non-state actor about this legal definition of terrorism? Why should that bind me from not engaging in the relevant conduct?
Well, I think there are two issues here. One is that, as a philosopher, what I'm concerned about is whether or not there's certain kinds, what the moral justification of certain kinds of uses of violence are. And so it doesn't quite matter whether or not it's legal or illegal, on the assumption that sometimes, of course, there can be things that are illegal that are moral, and of course, sometimes there are things that are perfectly legal but are actually quite immoral to do. And that use of the word terrorism also plays a very specific role in public discussions, because once you call something a terrorist act, you don't have to wonder or worry about why it was done, because the assumption is it doesn't matter. There's no way that it can be a right action, even if the ends were good. And the question is, are there really any such types of actions?
I mean, if somebody steals my car, I'm entitled to call it theft and use the law to capture and get to apprehend the felon and get my car back. Now, maybe there's some long, complicated story where this was really the right thing for him to do, but we don't need to worry about all that.
Yeah.
Isn't it just the same with terrorism?
Right. There's an international law, a covenant among the states that says, you shall not do these things to us and our citizens.
Right. My purpose in pointing that out is to make it clear that you can approach terrorism without using the word. when we started passing these treaties with the aircraft hijackings, it was concluded by all the states, including Cuba and the Soviet Union. Everyone agreed we should try to deter these. Now, we recognize that when someone hijacked an aircraft in Cuba or the Soviet Union to escape totalitarianism, they might have been doing a moral act. They might have been. So for that reason, we wrote the treaty in such a way as to enable ourselves to prosecute that individual ourselves rather than send him back to certain death or other unjust punishment there. So there was not a word of terrorism mentioned. And that, that's one way of approaching the subject. Of course, if you want to talk about the morality of things, that's a different issue entirely, or the philosophy.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I could go along with it being a different issue entirely, because when George Bush talked so eloquently the day after 9/11, and he used the word terrorists and war against terrorism, that excited a lot of emotion and justifiable indignation and anger in us. And I think that those emotions are tied to morality and tied to law only as it's taken as a reflection or a pretty good indication of what's wrong and what's right.
Nadim Hussein wants to get back in here.
And tied to this very specific feature that terrorist actions are supposed to have, namely that they're supposed to be morally heinous in a very special way. Right?
And what is that that special way?
What seems to be special about actions that people call terrorists are that they're these innocent civilians, right? That's the idea, that we have the innocent civilians being killed, being used as a means, not just as collateral damage, not just as, of course, when you engage in war, there's some civilians who might die as a result of action. But the question is, you really purposely use civilians and the killing of civilians for a particular purpose. And I think, in fact, we can construct stories on which we might be able to see how such an action would be justified. So here's the kind of example that I often think of. Imagine, in fact, that world history had gone quite differently, and England was running the world, had somehow managed to get back all its power. They had their military bases all over the United States.
You mean we're allies with England?
No,
we're oppressed and occupied.
Oppressed and occupied.
Occupied by the English.
And they're making us play cricket every day, and
oh my God,
no
what
American football allowed. And there are 1,000 brave U.S. Marines still left somewhere in the Rockies.
Yeah.
All right. And what are they going to do? Well, it's a complicated question. They could go after the British military bases, but my assumption here, the way I'm setting up the story, is this is an overwhelmingly powerful military. No point in attacking it directly. Nothing's going to happen.
Even if they got them right at tea time?
They sabotaged all the cricket ballots?
Yeah. I guess the English must have been pretty fierce fighters, or they wouldn't have been in charge of the world for as long as they were. So I should watch my tongue here.
That's right. And, of course, they use others to fight for them, don't forget.
Well, a lot of people thought that the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were moral acts, even though a lot of civilians were deliberately killed. I'm just trying to help out Nadine here. The idea was that this would end the war and save 1 million casualties, because the Japanese were fighting to the death everywhere. And to this day, many, many people feel that that was a justified act.
I just want to break in here and say what my state of mind here is. I'm kind of torn. As a philosopher, I don't have to really make up my mind. But on the one hand, what Abe Sofair, this international lawyer, is saying really resonates. That is, it's not what the U.S. says that makes it right. It's compliance with international law. That responds to the liberal in me.
Okay.
But then on the other hand, Nadim seems to be talking about this underdog that might have a very good cause. I think maybe it's American Indian tribe back in the 1880s, and people are saying, well, they're savages, and what's the content of that? Well, they don't share our rules. They're attacking in ways we don't think are proper. So I seem to have a conundrum here that somebody ought to solve for me.
Nadim, can you solve this conundrum for, or Abe, which of you can solve this conundrum for?
Well, I can bring you up to date on this problem.
Okay.
Because everyone wants to take the leap, especially lawyers. They want to take the leap from this list of treaties, we have about 10 of them, to some definition of some sort of violence that is improper no matter what the purpose. And we haven't been able to do it. It's very hard to get agreement on that, and there's good reason for it. You take, for example, South Africa. Some of the things that were done to fight apartheid would come within any reasonable definition of what you're not supposed to do. Really.
Right.
I mean, you blow up people shopping in a store and stuff, and yet you're fighting something so evil, and you don't have any other way to do it. As Nadim pointed out, there's no power. All the power is on the side of the people who the world recognizes as an evil government. So they've fallen down. In the UN, they have been unable to agree on a definition of terrorism as a general statement.
So what is the war on terrorism then a war on?
I mean, I think that you've got a very important point there, that even if we can't come up with a definition of terrorism for legal purposes, and so from the legal perspective it doesn't make sense to talk about terrorism, we as philosophers or as people talking about society still need to deal with the fact that ordinary people in everyday discussions and political situations are using the word terrorism, right? And there the worry is that the word terrorism prevents you from thinking about what's really, really crucial. Right. And what's really crucial is, what are the ends of the actors involved? Are the ends morally justified? Were there other means available where fewer civilians could have gotten killed? Those are the real essential issues.
Our guests are Stanford philosophy professor Nadim Hussain and Hoover fellow and acclaimed international lawyer Abe Sofair. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. You can hear more of our discussion with these gentlemen at philosophytalk.org.
In a moment, Barton Bernstein, a Stanford historian who specializes on Truman's decision to drop the A-bomb in World War II, will join us.
Was dropping the A-bomb an act of terrorism? That and more when Philosophy Talk returns. This is Philosophy Talk. I'm Ken Taylor.
And I'm John Perry.
Barton Bernstein is professor of history at Stanford University. The author of numerous books and articles, his research focus for many years has been the decision in 1945 by President Harry Truman to drop the atomic bomb.
After 9/11, in an interview with Gore Vidal, Bernstein said that if terrorism means killing innocents, the United States would have to be counted as one of the leading terrorist nations.
He said that?
Yes, he did.
Let's ask him why.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Barton Bernstein.
Thanks a lot, John. Now, let me explain at some length in typical kind of academic prose, if I may, which is to say that I would contend that if you look at the 20th century, certainly Stalin's Soviet Union, Hitler's Germany, Mao's China would rank highest. But if you look at the medley of nations in the 20th century, the United States would have to rank as one of the more significant terrorist nations. What I meant by that is that the United States, using state terrorism, not independent groups, especially in World War II and most especially in the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, predictably and intentionally used those atomic weapons to kill many Japanese, including mostly non-combatants.
But did they do it for a good end, to bring a quicker end to the war? And it was kind of the killing of the innocent civilians, as one might think, was an unavoidable byproduct of this good end.
Ending the war was undoubtedly a good purpose. Were there other means also? Yes. Would they have been successful? Hard to say. Some of them probably in combination would have been successful, but there was no, and this is very important, there was no serious consideration at the highest levels of choosing alternative routes to the atomic bomb. The targeting was to be in a city with the notion of the target being partly a factory or military installation surrounded, as it was put, surrounded by workers' houses. Stripped of euphemism, what's being said is terror bombing, hitting partly a military target and substantially a non-military cluster of non-combatants. For who lives in workers' houses?
Workers, that would be.
Workers and their families, children, older folks, etc.
Professor Bernstein, the decision to drop the bomb on Hiroshima was the first decision to drop an atomic bomb anywhere. But wasn't this kind of terror bombing commonplace by this time in the war?
I'm not sure that I'd want to say it was commonplace, but it was certainly not by any means unusual, and it was certainly familiar, which is to say that on the European continent, Britain first, Germany significantly, the United States belatedly, did drop bombs heavily upon cities, intentionally to kill primarily non-combatants.
But let me ask you a question about moral threshold here. I take it the German citizenry strongly supported the war effort, and so similarly with the Japanese citizenry. So in some sense you might say they were not non-combatants. They were crucial to Japan's and Germany's ability to sustain the war, and under that logic, kill as many Germans or Japanese as you possibly can.
Well, this is in fact part of the argument being used by Churchill and others, and it has some but very limited merit, which is to say in the nation state, especially during World War II, almost all the peoples in any of the major nation states supported the war effort by their government. But if you draw that argument to what I think is a reasonable and even logical conclusion, you end up then with the unit or denotation of non-combatant as a null set.
Well, right.
If the argument is there are no non-combatants, then an older conception of morality is totally irrelevant, and therefore anything goes in war. And yet, strangely, there is some morality in the war that operates as a restraining influence. The United States did not use gas warfare. It didn't use biological warfare. So there is a conception that certain things are not acceptable. And there was among American leaders some uneasiness in 1945 about the prospect of using the bomb primarily on non-combatants.
Well, let me ask this, jumping up to a contemporary perspective. We've got 9/11. We've got President Bush marshaling our forces against Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and so forth and so on. But we also have him describing this as a war on terrorism. Given the vagaries of the concept of terrorism, given your own view that by any reasonable definition we have engaged in terrorism, what are the dangers of describing our war against Osama bin Laden as a war on terrorism?
Whether Bush knows what terrorism is, whether he's concerned about it in detail, whether he'd seen a definition, I can't speak to. But obviously he chose a word that had a rich, forceful resonance that allowed him to target and to justify action against whom he properly saw as malefactors. The liability of calling them terrorists was that Bush never found it incumbent upon himself to talk about the reasons that Osama bin Laden had given a few years before 9/11 for defining the United States as enemy. Now, you can dislike his reasons, but he gave 3 reasons. He said that he deplored the American presence in Saudi Arabia. Secondly, he condemned the massive death resulting from the American-urged UN-imposed sanctions on Iraq,
Right.
which led at least to thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of dead. And thirdly, he sided with the Palestinians and against Israel and found the United States policy, for the most part, pro-Israeli. So let me just say that I think if Bush had argued that this is a difference of values, it's a difference about policy, it's the way we see the world. These are people we regard as both misguided and unfortunately rational. We deplore the policy, we support our own policy, and this is a clash. That at least would have moved the dialogue to a level which would have permitted, I think, some kind of appropriate and thoughtful analysis.
Professor Bernstein, thank you very much for joining us on Philosophy Talk.
Well, thanks a lot, John.
Ken, we started with the question whether the concept of terrorism really adds anything to discussions about 9/11 and other issues. And I'm inclined towards the view that it doesn't. Abe Sofair says, let's just stick to the laws that the nations have agreed to for conduct during wartime and peacetime and leave it at that. And that seems right to me.
Yeah, and that suggests we should just jettison the word terrorism. I mean, it just obscures the real issue Abe was telling us. I mean, why did Osama bin Laden attack? What were his reasons? What should our response be? And we shouldn't just throw around inflammatory statements like he's a terrorist. These are hard questions, and there's lots more we can say about them. Lots more ideas about just war theory, for example, that we haven't been able to explore. But our listeners can find out more about them at philosophytalk.org.
And when you go to our website, you will find plenty of evidence that philosophers can think about any topic, from something large and important like terrorism to something as trivial as whether picking up a $10 bill that's been abandoned on the street counts as theft.
Stuck in a quandary? Why not give us a call? We won't solve your problems, but we'll make them a whole lot more complicated than you ever thought they could be. A little something we call a conundrum.
And our first caller is Janice.
Hello, Janice. Welcome to Philosophy Talk. I'm Ken Taylor.
And I'm John Perry.
Hi.
Where are you calling from, Janice?
I'm calling from Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts.
Oh, you lucky
what a
lady.
great place. How's the summer at Martha's Vineyard?
It's nice. I just got here a couple of days ago. I live in New York. So it's a really, really nice change.
Nobody's in New York in August, right? Is that right?
It's ridiculous.
All right. What's your conundrum?
My question is, if you are interviewing someone for a job and they're qualified in every way for the job, but they sort of give you the willies, is it okay not to hire them and hire someone that's less qualified?
Ooh, they give you the willies.
No,
Can you define willies a little bit for me?
I should warn you here. You're talking to Ken's a big black guy, and big black guys in our culture give a lot of people the willies.
So tell me about the willies.
Ken doesn't give me the willies.
But John gives me the willies. Bearded old white guys
I'm
always
a
give me the
bearded old
willies.
white guy that's scaling and falling apart.
But anyway, no, tell me about what do you mean you get the willies?
Just there's something about the person, the first impression you get is that you're not comfortable with them, and it's not an easy interaction.
Lack of eye contact?
That sort of thing, something where you just think there's something about this person that's not connecting well with me.
I'd say the first step is to see if you can make these willies a little more objective. Like if there is a pattern of lack of eye contact, then that's an objective feature that you've noticed. And then the question is, well, what's the explanation of it? And is it the sort of thing that actually might have an effect on the job, or would it just be a minor irritation? What is the job one that involves dealing with people?
Mainly only dealing with me.
Mainly only dealing with you.
Yeah,
this would be your subordinates, and
I suppose people do trust their kind of willy detector. I don't know what to call it. Their intuitions. People do trust their intuitions. But I guess the philosophical question is, are you really entitled to trust those intuitions?
Right.
Are those intuitions really reliable at picking up information about people? People who give you the willies, do you usually avoid them afterwards? If somebody gives you the willies.
Not like actively, but I think I wouldn't want to spend 8 hours a day with a person
So
that
if somebody
gives
gives
me
you the willies, you kind of decrease the amount of time you spend around them.
Right.
You have first positive impressions and first negative impressions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which ones turned out to be right? I think your negative impressions, probably you don't get any more evidence about them. Because on the basis of your negative impressions, you avoid people.
Right.
So you have no way of knowing whether you were wrong.
Right.
Right?
That's interesting. I'm going to test that one out.
Yeah, let me tell you a little story my mother told me, probably not true. She said this couple had been married for 20 years, and the man, when he drank his coffee, always extended his little finger out straight. And finally that drove his wife so crazy she got a divorce. And years later they met, and she said, I was embarrassed to explain what really drove me crazy about you, but it's that stupid little finger. And he says, well, that was broken when I was playing football as a kid. I can't bend it.
Oh, no.
So I would say it's worth trying to really try to diagnose what it is about this person that gives you the willies, and make sure that it's that you're not misreading a perfectly innocent sign. That's more a matter of fairness.
I think that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have we solved your conundrum or helped you anyway?
Well, I definitely feel like I'm going to use that
Good.
in future interactions.
Okay. Well, thanks for calling.
Thanks a lot.
Philosophy Talk comes to you from Philosophy Corner, a special little corner at Stanford University reserved for the pure intellect. Stanford itself is located in an unlikely spot, Palo Alto, California.
Our program is produced by Ben Manillo Productions of San Francisco. Copyright 2002, Stanford University. Our team includes Peter Kremens, Jonathan Mitchell, Amy Standen, Alex Martinez, Merle Kessler, and Monica Hill, with production assistance from KQED Radio. I'm Ken Taylor.
And I'm John Perry. And it was Socrates who said the unexamined life is not worth living. And John Stuart Mill who added, it's better to be Socrates unsatisfied than a pig satisfied. Ken, is that the Stanford band? I hear drumming.
John, that's not drumming, that's conundrumming.
Oh. It appears we have another conundrum waiting for us.
This time it's a gentleman named Andy.
Hello, Andy. This is John Perry, and you're on Philosophy Talk.
This is Ken Taylor. Welcome.
John, Ken, thanks. Glad to be here.
So where are you calling from?
I'm calling from San Francisco.
So what's your conundrum, Andy?
I suspect this is probably a pretty common one, and most people, at least in San Francisco, have run into this one. So you're having dinner, or you're at a movie or whatever, and you leave, and you're walking on the street, and then you see someone sitting on the curb or someplace, and they have the little cup with the sign on it asking for change.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I feel like I want to help that person.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel like I have, maybe a responsibility to help that person.
Okay, that sounds reasonable.
I really don't know whether a donation is going to help or hurt. If my donation would go in the form of something that, either is, not necessarily helpful to that individual, cigarettes, alcohol, something like that, or something even more sinister. I mean, let's say it's something like, I don't know,
cocaine,
ammunition.
Ammunition.
I'd be a little less inclined to help, obviously.
So, one thing is that the guy wants the money, right? I mean, whatever he's going to do with it, he's a human being with a want, and you give him a quarter, you'll satisfy that want, or $1 or $5
Yeah, I mean,
or $20.
Are we talking about life? Are you talking about the life-changing amounts of money, like $100,000?
Yeah.
So we're talking change, or a dollar bill, or something.
Some small amount.
But let's ask what you want. So the guy wants $1.
Right.
If you just want for him to get something he wants and to have that little feeling of whatever that a person gets when they get what they want.
Satisfaction.
Yeah, then I don't see that you have too much of a problem. If what you want is to help him, in some sense, improve his life or his health, or at least to know for sure that you're not making his life or his health worse, then you'd have to know what he wanted to do with the money. And then it seems to me you've got all kinds of problems.
I mean, what's the value in giving money to a homeless? What's the a panhandler in the street? What's the value you see in that?
Well, I would help that in general. I would be contributing to his ability to, build a better life. Get off the street, perhaps.
Realistically,
healthy.
Why did you give him $1,000 then?
That's a good question.
But I'm just saying, the small act of charity that you perform is a small act of charity. It's not really a life-changing thing. And it seems to me the value in it is not the extent to which you can ameliorate somebody's life in a sort of deep and substantial way, but it's just to express to them your fellow feeling, your sympathy for them. And if that's the real value in it, that you're expressing sympathy and fellow feeling, why do you care so much what they do with the money?
Now, some people object to giving money to homeless people because they say it, if people are in the habit of giving money to homeless people, that there'll be more homeless people or more asking for money. So, on the other hand, Kant, Ken's favorite philosopher, thinks
second favorite philosopher after you, John.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Thinks that that it's important sometimes in life just to accept another person ends as your own, to do something because they want it. So there's kind of a conflict among moral theorists here, isn't there, Ken, about what to do?
I mean, you could think all the money that you might give to homeless people, give it to an institution that will try to make systematic change. But I still think there's a value to his seeing concrete expression of sympathy from just a random person on the street.
Okay.
So I hope we've helped solve your conundrum.
Well, I think you have.
Thanks for calling in.
Thanks a lot.
This is Philosophy Talk. I'm Ken Taylor.
And I'm John Perry. Today's topic is terrorism. What does it mean to be a terrorist? Is terrorism worse than other kinds of warfare? Is terrorism even a clear concept or just a word that expresses a lot of negative emotion? We're talking about terrorism with Abe Sofair from Stanford's Hoover Institute and Nadim Hussain from Stanford's Philosophy Department.
Now, Nadim, you've said that it matters somehow to the definition of terrorism whether the country being attacked is a democracy. I mean, isn't terrorism no matter what? What difference does it make if the attacked country is a democratic society or a totalitarian one?
When you're attacking a totalitarian society where the ordinary civilians don't have much impact on what the government does, that's quite different than attacking a democracy for two reasons. One is because in a democracy, the government's going to care more about what happens to those civilians, right? So, Saddam Hussein doesn't care much at all about what happens to if thousands of his civilian population die. In a democracy, of course, the government is more responsive.
Right.
All right. Now, and the other thing, of course, is that in a democracy, it's a much more complicated question about whether civilians really are innocent.
It's not a question of democracy. It's a whether, I mean, what is a non-combatant? I mean, is the question you're kind of raising. I mean, you can be a combatant even if you don't carry a gun.
Well, and also that, we have this funny idea that somehow the soldiers are not innocent. I mean, when I think of your average U.S. Marine, I think of some man or woman who signed up to the Army either for the love of country or because they just want to have a good salary and earn a decent living and do a good job.
Yeah.
Right? In what sense are they sort of not innocent?
Well, they're just fair targets. You see, here you go off. You philosophers are going off the road again.
Okay.
I didn't know we ever got back on the road.
Right.
Right.
The law,
Very generous of you to
Still
give
off the road. Yeah.
the Geneva Conventions define combatants as people who are engaged in war and authorized to engage in war by wearing uniforms, governed by a structure of command. There are remedies for their misbehavior. And as a result of all that, they are authorized to kill. And other combatants are authorized to kill them without being penalized under the criminal law. So this is a very important distinction. These people can be killed. They can also kill. But other people who are non-combatants cannot be killed. It doesn't matter whether they're innocent or guilty.
I want to challenge you a little bit. I understand the point you're making, but I still think you're talking a lot about how states regulate interstate conflict, and the agreements they reach in order to regulate interstate conflict. And we have this distinction between fair target and non-fair target. But if I'm a terrorist, I'm typically a non-state actor. Now, why should I be governed? Why should I care morally or pragmatically about these interstate agreements, about how to regulate interstate conflict?
Well, you shouldn't really, because you have no protection from them.
Right.
The only thing you should worry about is if some tribunal gets a hold of you and prosecutes you and hangs you. If you seriously look at that issue, the only thing you have to worry about is the fact that that is an international crime that you're committing, and you can get arrested and tried for it. If you're ready to die for a cause, obviously you're not going to care at all.
Well, I'm really worried that if you rest too much upon the international legal system, then you're falling into the trap where might makes right. Okay.
Exactly.
And the worry is that the international legal system, of course, is set up by whichever are the most powerful international organizations. The legal rules will be set up for their interests. Now, if it turned out that the interests of the collective interests of the powerful states of the world always were the interests of morality, then we'd be home free.
Right.
But what's the likelihood of that?
Surely, right. I mean, I'd like to get Nail Nadeem Hussein down on something that came up earlier in the show. I want to go back to your claims about innocent civilians. You said, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that an Iraqi citizen has more claim to being an innocent civilian than an American, the citizen of a functioning democracy like the U.S. And that would seem to me to entail that actions that cost Iraqi lives on the part of people like us, right, are somehow morally worse than actions that cost American lives, like the World Trade Center bombing.
Well, to judge the action as morally worse, you have to consider everything that's involved.
Right.
But so the question is, what's the moral cost of killing civilians from different societies?
Right.
And in that case, what I want to say is, yes, I do think that there is a difference, that in societies that are democratic, there's a way in which we collectively are responsible for what our government does, in a way that societies which aren't democratic, the civilians aren't responsible.
Of course, you're talking about some ideal, I take it. I mean, sometimes the government deliberately lies to us, acts in secret, and conceals its actions. Sometimes power is usurped. I mean, so I assume you're talking about an ideal.
Well, I'm not saying that American democracy is perfect, and I'm not saying that American electoral processes in all of our states always work just right.
Right.
But I do think that there is some very important way in which America is much more of a democracy than Iraq is.
Well, that's
all right.
Let's hope.
And it's in that important sense in which I do think it's true that we as citizens are much more responsible for what our state does.
Can I point out that what you've done just now is you've set up a nice process for punishing people for being part of an evil enterprise, and you haven't decided yet what is evil. So
well, that's
you better
true.
get back to the...
Yeah,
right.
Well, you've said...
I was going to say that actually our guests here seem to be in agreement on a very fundamental philosophical point. They're both very skeptical that you could come up with a definition of a kind of act that wouldn't be morally justified, that would be morally outrageous, morally despicable, morally wrong, no matter what ends it served. Even blowing up innocent people in shopping centers, the kind of thing that outrages us today when it happens in Israel, is something that seemed like the only means that good people had of ending apartheid. That's Abe Sofair's example.
Well, I think we both would agree that the concepts of necessity and proportionality stem from universally felt human values, and that you should never kill a human being unless it's necessary to achieve this good end, and you should never kill more human beings than you need to achieve the good end. And then the area where we have to look, and I agree with Nadine that you really have to get to this issue ultimately as a human being, and that is, what are the good ends and what are the evil ends?
You can learn more about these issues at philosophytalk.org.
Okay, so John, Professor Nadim Hussain and law professor Abe Sofair are agreed that one of the most important questions about terrorism is this: are the perpetrators' ultimate ends good or evil? That sounds kind of like the ends justify the means to me. There must be a philosophical principle somewhere that says things aren't so simple. I mean, philosophy always says things aren't so simple.
Yes, there is. It goes back to St. Thomas, and it says you can't just look at the ends and the means. You have to look at the relation between them.
This sounds complicated.
It is somewhat complicated. It's called the principle of double effect, and that makes it sound complicated. It means that you could have two acts that had the same bad results and the same good results, but one could be better than the other.
What? Can you give me an example I can understand?
Sure. Suppose a baby is falling from a balcony and you and I are standing there. First act, I catch the baby, but to catch the baby, I have to get under it, and to do that, I have to push you aside. I push you aside, you fall down, your dignity is compromised, and maybe you're hurt.
No, I'm collateral damage.
You're collateral damage in that case. Second scenario, I don't catch the baby. I push you in such a way that you fall down, your dignity is compromised, and you're hurt, but the baby lands on your stomach and is saved.
Oh, so you kind of use me as a human trampoline?
I use you as a human trampoline. Now that, according to the principle of double effect, the first one was better than the second one.
Well,
even though you got hurt the same amount in both, and your dignity was compromised in both, and the baby was caught in both, or at least wasn't hurt in both, still the first is better than the second.
So let me see. So wait, the first is better than the second because in the first one, my getting hurt is just a kind of foreseen, unavoidable, but unintended consequence. I mean, you didn't really intend to hurt me.
It wasn't part of the plan.
It wasn't part of the plan. Second one, you're using me as a kind of a mere tool. I'm just an instrument in your plan.
That's right.
I'm just a human trampoline. I don't think I like that.
You mean it seems wrong for me to use you as a human trampoline?
Yeah, because I'm a person with rights. So, I mean, I don't know if that makes you a terrorist.
You like the distinction.
Yeah, it seems like a good distinction.
See, I explained it, but I'm a little bit skeptical about it. I'm not sure I see the difference. If the bad results are the same and the good results are the same, it's not clear to me.
But there's a difference between using me as a tool, which you do the second time, and having some bad, unavoidable, unforeseen, unintended, some foreseen but unavoidable and unintended consequence.
Well, let's learn a little bit more about St. Thomas Aquinas, the guy who came up with this distinction. Here's Ian Scholes, our 60-second philosopher.
Ian Scholes. St. Thomas Aquinas was a big, slow-moving guy, nicknamed Dumb Ox in his youth, who nonetheless proved himself smart enough to prove the existence of God 5 different ways, merge faith and reason to form the modern bases for the Catholic Church, and along the way, originate the concept of the principle of double effect. This refers to an action from which both good and bad will follow. In serving to avoid a child in the street, for instance, you might hit a puppy. During a war, bombing a munitions plant might kill some non-combatants. In theological terms, various conditions are set forth for the principle to see if the perpetrator of the action has committed a sin. The initial action must be morally good, or at least indifferent. The actor must not desire the bad effect, and so forth. In the secular world, the principle of double effect has led to such concepts as collateral damage, expert testimony, and innocent bystander. Thomas Aquinas was the son of a count, a cousin of the Holy Roman Emperor, part of a family more into power than manifestations of faith. Being a non-warrior type, things were arranged for him to become a monk. Eventually, to become abbot of Monte Cassino, it was hoped, and of some use to the family. Instead, he decided to become a mendicant friar in the Dominican order. Kind of like telling your senator father you're going to be a hippie. So his brothers kidnapped him, locked him in a castle, hoping he'd change his mind. During his captivity, his brothers, either to tempt or embarrass him, brought a prostitute to his room. Losing his temper, Thomas chased her out of the room with a piece of burning wood, and then burned the mark of the cross on the door. After a year of captivity, his sister snuck him out and he went on to become the influential thinker, Aristotle admirer, and heresy basher the world knows today. So, did his chasing the painted harlot from his room employ the principle of double effect? Well, let's see. Chasing a woman with a burning piece of wood doesn't necessarily seem like a morally good action to me, but then again, I'm not a virtuous man, and Thomas Aquinas had virtue up the wazoo. But if it was a good act, the good side was his virtue was protected. The bad side, he disrespected his family's wishes and damaged a perfectly good door. In the larger sense, I suppose it was good that he went on to forge the foundation of the modern Catholic Church, but then again, there are those who view the Catholic Church and religion itself with mixed feelings. Does the principle of double effect itself have a double effect? Before it, those prone to put things to the torch would do it at the drop of a snood. Today, those prone to put things to the torch think twice about it. Well, they still do it, mind you, but there's a slight hesitation before lighting the fuse. And Thomas Aquinas did get sainthood out of the deal, but again, on the bad side, he wasn't around to enjoy it. I gotta go.
I believe Ian has identified the absolute top baud rate for human comprehension.
Ian Scholl's 60-second profiles of philosophers can be heard semi-regularly on Philosophy Talk.
Ian Scholl's, when you just don't have time for more.
We are looking at terrorism. St. Thomas's principle of double effect, which we've been discussing, is often used to demarcate the difference between collateral damage, which isn't so bad, and terrorism, which is really bad.
John, wasn't it St. Thomas Aquinas who used to say, "We'll be back after a short break"?
No, it was Arthur Godfrey.
This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. Welcome back to Philosophy Talk. I'm John Perry, professor of philosophy at Stanford University, and I'm talking to Ken Taylor, who happens to be my boss, the chairman of the department.
And your good friend.
Yes, when my salary is acceptable and,
Yes,
and my office isn't given away to other people.
Yes. Our topic today is terrorism, and we're focusing for the moment on the principle of double effect. That principle is commonly used to demarcate a distinction between terrorism and collateral damage. Both involve the killing of innocents, but the principle helps us decide, when it counts as terrorism and when it counts as collateral damage.
Well, certainly most Americans would accept that the terrible events of 9/11 were terrorism.
No doubt about that.
Civilians were targeted, and the end in view seemed to be the effect on the American population.
Yeah. You'd have to be pretty wacko to deny that was terrorism.
On the other hand, a lot of people died in our successful attempt to liberate Afghanistan. And that we would take to be collateral damage. They may have been killed by bombs. They may have been people that were unavoidably close to military targets. But we weren't trying to kill civilians. That's collateral damage.
Yeah.
But the question is, one question we should look at is how much difference does this make to the collateral damage?
Yeah, to the victims.
The victims, direct and indirect. Is it comforting to know that your loved one was collateral damage and not a terrorist victim?
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually have a report that might help us think about that. In January 2002, a group of Americans whose loved ones died in September 11th traveled to Afghanistan to meet with Afghanis who lost loved ones as a consequence of American bombing raids. They traveled there under the auspices of a San Francisco organization called Global Exchange. This tape comes from journalist Reese Ehrlich.
He says, "My name is Shamsur Rahman, Shamsi. On that day when the aircraft came and dropped the bomb, so on that day we had an engagement party for my brother. There were so many people. My house is completely destroyed."
How many people were killed?
Yes, about 5 people killed here.
I had images of, there's the caves over there, let's go bomb them, But it doesn't work that way. I think history would show that no bombing campaign has ever been perfect. There's always been collateral damage.
I feel a terrible pain when I think of my son. I was sitting in that room over there. All of a sudden, the bomb fell and the room filled with dust and smoke.
This child was on that time asleep. And when he says that you wake up from sleep, he's like this.
So he has mental problems.
Yes.
Trauma.
I just feel heartbroken. I see these people who had so little to begin with, so poor, and now their lives are so much worse.
You almost feel a little bit selfish because you're grieving and your loss was a horrible loss, and it shouldn't be diminished, but We can go home to our warm homes. I know that I can get a job. I have a master's degree. I had the freedom to go to school and go that far. And even my stepsister got to graduate from high school, and she had a really loving family and people who tried to make her life as wonderful as possible. And people here also try to make their children's lives as wonderful as possible, but they can't.
Some reactions from Afghani and American citizens, all touched personally by the events and aftermath of 9/11.
That tape courtesy of journalist Reese Ehrlich. This is Philosophy Talk. I'm Ken Taylor.
And I'm John Perry. With us in the studio are Abe Sofair, a professor of law and a Hoover Fellow at Stanford University.
And Nadim Hussain, an assistant professor of philosophy at Stanford.
We have been discussing what philosophers call the principle of double effect. This principle may or may not help us to determine when the killing of innocents can be excused.
So, Nadim, for you, what is the essence of this question?
I think that the question really is the question of what are the good ends and what are evil ends. And the problem with using the word terrorism and talking about a war on terrorism is it distracts us from that fundamental discussion.
Yeah. Now, there's when our ends are good ones and when they aren't, and there's when the other guy's ends are good ones and when they aren't. Suppose that Osama is wrong about us, morally speaking.
You're on a first-name basis with the guy.
Yeah. Well, he's, So suppose that he's wrong, morally speaking, about America in the world. I mean, suppose that we're not a hegemonic, oppressive power destroying cultures wherever we encounter them. But he thinks that about us. Well, it seems to me, if he's wrong and he attacks us on the basis of this wrong belief, and he kills lots of civilians on the basis of this wrong belief, then it seems to me that we do have a claim there to innocence. And I don't know why we can't call him a terrorist. I don't know.
But here's why the word terrorist is dangerous, right? I think the reality is much more complicated. This is, of course, another show, not just about terrorism, but about American foreign policy. My view is, well, look, part of Osama bin Laden's criticism of the United States as a hegemonic power, as imperialist, are right. And part of Osama bin Laden's goals, namely to spread Wahhabi puritanical Islam, that's crazy. And I'd do more or less anything to stop that from happening, right? But that makes the situation much more complicated.
I agree.
So you need to make a much more careful and subtle assessment of it. And you aren't going to do that if you just go around calling people terrorists.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in fact, let's assume that old OBL, as he's called in some other circles, only used military means and only attacked within the constraints of the Geneva Conventions. He would be as much our enemy, and we would be just as eager to get him.
Yeah.
It isn't the fact that he resorted to terrorist means, quote unquote, that leads us to think that he is pursuing objectives that we would fight to the death. And let me just add one other thing now. In terms of why is it that this kind of Wahhabi Islam is wrong from a moral point of view and does not justify even legitimate means? And I think that the UN Charter contains certain statements. They're not legal statements. They're not legally enforceable statements, but they are statements on which every nation in the world, every member of the UN, has signed off. And among them is this notion of freedom of religion. Another notion is the right of human beings not to be killed without due process. Another notion is the right of women to be treated equally.
Yeah.
And these notions are ignored in certain parts of the world, it's true. But they are fundamental values that I think we have the right to assert, are values that all of us are bound to obey.
That sounds very powerful to me. Unfortunately, though, I mean, here's another critique that OPL could make against us. We say those things that you just said, Abe, but then we support basically medieval monarchies in many places in the world. Places like Saudi Arabia, our clients and allies. I mean, so if we're going to criticize and use our moral superiority, then we better darn well be morally superior, it would seem to me.
Well, let me put in a little word for hypocrisy here. I think at least with people, it's better to have somebody who sees the good and enunciates it even if they fail to live up to it, than someone who brings the good down to what they can succeed in living up to. I think that's also true with nations. I don't want to get the U.S. off the hook. I'm a big critic of the U.S. for a lot of things, but as a general principle, I just want to dig in my heels a little.
Well, I agree with you, but
Two cheers for hypocrisy.
But I do think there are things that are so fundamental that we are not accomplishing, and the debate over good and evil is really a distraction. The Rwanda massacre, for example, occurred on our watch as a superpower. We allowed it to happen. In fact, we blocked the use of force to keep it from happening in the Security Council because we had been so humiliated in Somalia.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's something that's immoral, clearly. And we should have stopped it, and we should have even paid a price to stop it if necessary. And that is why you're right. You're right in that we should try to be moral, but in a sense, we're not innocent. And that's what I think we're saying here today. We're not innocent.
But I still, the idealist in me, the non-cynic in me, says that we can strive to achieve that innocence. We can strive to make this country such that it really does spread good around the world, and it does respect the diversity of cultures in the world and the rights of people of self-governance. I don't see why that's not achievable.
But the loose use of the word terrorism is not going to facilitate that development.
On that note, I think we should thank our guests, Nadim Hussein and Abe Sofair, for a stimulating and enlightening conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Our conversation with Professor Hussein and Sofair can be heard in its entirety at philosophytalk.org.
Ken, let's return to the question with which we started. Is terrorism a concept that really adds anything to our political debate?
Well, there's one thing that's worth noticing. The word terrorism and the phrase collateral damage, they're in a way emotive opposites. Both clearly involve the killing of innocents. But when you describe the killing of innocents as collateral damage, when you use that phrase, what you're trying to do is quiet the passions as opposed to inflaming them, right? I mean, if you say it's just collateral damage, you're not supposed to feel angry or outraged. I mean, you may feel regret, but you shouldn't feel guilty about that. But if you use the phrase terrorism, you're trying to inflame the passions rather than calm them. And there you're supposed to be outraged. You're supposed to seek justice, demand revenge.
Well, we don't want to slide into thinking that all emotive language is bad. I don't want to be deprived of the right to call bastards bastards.
But in the hands of politicians, I do think there's a thing to be guard against. In the hands of politicians, emotive language is potentially a dangerous thing. It's potentially a very useful thing, but it's also potentially a dangerous thing.
It's a way of bypassing thought processes.
Right, exactly.
And just inflaming the emotions.
For more of our discussion and for some interesting links about today's topic, I invite you to visit www.philosophytalk.org. This has been Philosophy Talk.
Coming to you from Philosophy Corner. This is the very spot where William James was standing in 1906. While a visiting professor of philosophy at Stanford, he experienced the great San Francisco earthquake. It destroyed a lot of Stanford, but it didn't affect Philosophy Corner, made firm and stable by the great intellects that have lived there.
Our program is produced by Ben Manillo Productions of San Francisco, copyright 2002, Stanford University. Our team includes Peter Kremens, Jonathan Mitchell, Amy Standen, Alex Martinez, Merle Kessler, and Monica Hill. Production assistance from KQED Radio. I'm Ken Taylor, and he's John Perry.
Ken, the philosopher Zeno said time was unreal. For example, we'll never reach the end of the show because to reach the end, we'd have to get halfway to the end. And to get halfway to the end, we'll have to get halfway to the end, and so forth and so forth. So there's an infinite number of things we have to do to finish the show, and we don't have an infinite amount of time to do it in.
Zeno was wrong.